The Expulsion from Garden of Eden, or The Perfect Crime, Episode 17. Hello to all listeners, and thank you for joining us for the second episode dealing with the second creation story in the book of Genesis, chapters 2 and 3. In the previous episode, we focused on the first creation story that opens the book of Genesis, in which God created the world in 6 days and sanctified the seventh day as a day of rest. We saw that this story serves as a legal basis for many social laws scattered throughout the Bible, 3 of which we discussed. The second story tells that God planted a miraculous garden, the Garden of Eden, at the far end of a dry, desolate land where nothing grew. In Hebrew, the meaning of the word Eden is great abundance. Indeed, the Garden of Eden was a wonderful place with a rich variety of fruits of every kind. In addition to the fruit trees that filled the garden, God planted 2 special trees. One is the tree of life, and the other is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which will be at the center of this episode. Abbreviated quote, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." As we know, God created the first man, called Adam, from dust, and brought him to the Garden of Eden, and said to him the following, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Afterward, God created all the animals, and finally, he created a woman, called Eve, from one of the ribs of Adam, thus completing the creation of the world according to the second version. We don't know how much time passed since the creation of Eve until the day the serpent met her and tempted her to eat from the forbidden fruit. And so, he said to her, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" Eve admitted that God had forbidden eating from the fruit of this specific tree, to which the serpent replied, "You will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Eve was tempted by the serpent's words and ate from the forbidden fruit, which for unknown reasons over time turned into a red apple, and she also gave it to Adam to eat. The punishment for their crime came immediately. God cast them out of the garden, and with them he cast out all the animals. Like the first creation story, literary motifs that are found in hundreds of charming and imaginative myths prevalent in the ancient world have also penetrated this creation story. We will talk about some of these in the third episode. Nevertheless, we must mention here 2 motifs that are repeated in almost all myths and are relevant to us. The first deals with the question of why humans are endowed with knowledge and skills that no other animal possesses. Ancient peoples believed that their gods granted them the essential knowledge for their survival. This refers to the knowledge required for agriculture, making iron tools, using medicinal plants, and many more. The second motif deals with the recognition that the gods live eternal lives while humans are mortal. The desire to overcome death that awaits us all at the end of the road occupies an important place in ancient mythologies. When we turn to the story of what happened in the Garden of Eden, it becomes clear that while the gods granted their people all the knowledge necessary for their existence, God did not give Adam and Eve any knowledge. And this is not surprising since they lived in a place that provided them with all their needs. And since no one died in the Garden of Eden, they did not seek to escape it. From every aspect, the amazing garden was a hermetic capsule, frozen in place where nothing happened. It was a place where no one was born, fell ill, or died. In practice, the wonderful garden resembled a sophisticated car that the manufacturer did not install an engine in, and therefore, it will never drive. The writers of the Bible understood the great hindrance in the story of a wonderful garden where life is frozen in place. They understood that for the clock of real life to start ticking, the first couple must commit a crime that would compel God to cast them out of his garden. And eating from the fruit of the forbidden tree was a perfect and brilliant crime. And now we will prove our claim. We mentioned that ancient people believed their gods endowed them with the knowledge essential for their existence. This is not surprising, as none of these gods placed the humans they created in a magical place like the Garden of Eden. The gods who provided the knowledge necessary for man's existence in real life were good, but alongside them lived wicked gods who committed adultery, stole, and robbed each other. These gods fought over trifle matters and incited humans to fight each other. These gods mated with women, and through this, they introduced their cruelty and lust for corruption into the human DNA. The people who lived in present-day Iran said that even before creation, two spirits existed side by side. Ahura Mazda was the god of light, wisdom, and truth who created all the good in the world, and Ahriman, his sworn enemy, was identified with the forces of destruction and demons who created plagues and diseases and all the evils and calamities that befell human beings. The Bible presents an opposing conception of the negative characteristics of evil gods like Ahriman. According to the Bible, God is the essence of purity and morality, and there is not even a shadow of a flaw in him. God is the essence of justice. He is the Lord of judgment who judges his people with absolute righteousness. This belief did not allow the Bible writers to say that God created any flaw in the world, like death, plagues, wars, evil, and corruption. Such an admission would have contradicted the belief in God's perfection, and therefore they had to say that he created a perfect world, and the Garden of Eden was a perfect place. However, the writers of the Bible did not live in La La Land, and the gap between reality, which resembled hell more than the ideal garden they described, required them to introduce into the perfect creation a perfect crime. And as we said, eating the forbidden fruit was a perfect and brilliant crime. To understand where we are heading, we need to reread the reason why God forbade man to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Quote, "You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." The fruit of the magical tree had two special and supernatural qualities that were not found in any other tree besides it. The first quality was knowledge. Knowledge in the Bible is not like the knowledge that the gods bestowed upon pagan peoples, but the ability to recognize the existence of the God of children of Israel, the ability to recognize his greatness and understand his will, to accept his commandments, and to fulfill them. We will give only 2 examples, but those who want can easily find many more. The author of the book of Proverbs said, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Proverbs 1:7. And thus, in short, the prophet Isaiah described the characteristics of the Messiah. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, which means on the Messiah, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. The ability to recognize the existence of God and understand his commandments is the first and necessary condition for distinguishing between good and evil, between what God commanded to do and what he forbade. Therefore, the question of why he forbade Adam to eat from the fruit that enabled him such excellent abilities becomes even sharper. The answer to this question is found in the second quality of the forbidden fruit. The fruit contained death within it. Quote, "For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Death posed a threat to the purity of the Garden of Eden, and this must be explained. The Bible repeats a belief that was prevalent among all the peoples who lived in the ancient world, according to which demons and other harmful beings associated with satanic destructive forces like Ahriman dwell within the bodies of dead humans, and from within them they come out to attack and contaminate the temples they built in honor of the good gods they believed in. Indeed, temples honoring the good gods who helped and protected their people were erected throughout the ancient world. Anyone who reads the laws written in the Bible, mainly in the book of Leviticus, will immediately see that the writers of the Bible adopted the concept that impurity has a demonic and destructive power that is attracted to holy places and contaminates them. But while pagan peoples attributed impurity and filth to demonic destructive forces external to humans, the belief in the existence of one pure God required the writers of the Bible to determine that impurity is an immanent part of human beings, something we do not find in the mythologies told by the other ancient peoples. According to the Bible, the impurity created in the human body is part of its natural life course and cannot and should not be avoided. This refers to sexual relations, the woman's monthly cycle, and the blood of childbirth. All these are considered impurities that bathing in water purifies the human body. Yet, the body of the dead people, and not the dead animal permitted for eating, is considered the most severe and dangerous source of impurity, and this matter is detailed in the book of Numbers, chapter 19. According to the Bible, all kinds of impurities are not dangerous to humans and are not dangerous to a person who encounters a dead person, but they endanger the temple. Impurity and defilement, like a magnet, are attracted to the temple and threaten the purity of the place that symbolizes God's presence on earth, because God will not dwell in a contaminated temple. And this claim brings us back to the prohibition on eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We do not have to prove that the Garden of Eden, which was God's garden, was the holiest place on earth, and therefore it must be preserved from any impurity and filth. This fact explains why no one was born or died in the garden, and so it remained pure and sterile, but frozen in place. For the real desolate world waiting outside the garden to set out, the first couple had to release the death that was imprisoned within the forbidden fruit, thereby compelling God to cast them out. For now, impurity, which is a natural part of every human being, was also found in them. To prevent the two from returning to the garden and threatening to smuggle impurity into it, God closed its gates. Quote, "After God drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life." Genesis 3:24. The first couple and the animals were cast out into a reality world that contained all kinds of impurities. The first thing Adam and Eve did was to mate and multiply, and when their time came, they passed away. Now it's time to answer the question, in what way does the perfect crime committed by Adam and Eve contribute to the understanding of the Bible? At the beginning of this episode, we mentioned that the gods worshipped by ancient peoples were seen as good and generous, but alongside them operated corrupt and unrestrained gods. And since they used to mate with humans, they introduced their vices to them. According to the Bible, on the day Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, their DNA changed. They became the only creatures among all the animals God created who understand what God's will is, that God speaks to them, and that they speak to God. A human being is the only creature who can distinguish between good and evil, and who can restrain himself and do no harm. And most importantly, only thanks to the ability to distinguish right from wrong, a person can choose whether to fulfill the laws and commandments given to them by God or to violate them. And they also know in advance what the consequences of their choices will be. What we just said leads us to the retribution principle that crosses the Bible from beginning to end. The retribution principle is a simple equation that says that if the children of Israel fulfill all the commandments and laws given to them by God, then God will bless them and protect them from all evil. But if they decide to violate the laws they received, then God will punish them severely. In the book of Deuteronomy illustrates this equation accurately. Here in brevity is the blessing side. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. Deuteronomy 28:1-14. After the blessings comes the second part of the equation, which is a list of punishments awaiting those who choose to violate the commandments given to them by God. Here are a few sentences. If you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land, and the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flock. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. Deuteronomy 28:15-16. Let us draw the conclusions that arise from this episode. We said that the question of what explains human knowledge occupied the ancient peoples, and that the answer that emerges from all mythologies they told is that their gods bestowed upon them one grain of the infinite knowledge that humans need for their existence. We also said that alongside the good gods operated corrupt gods who mated with females, and through this way, they inserted their evil into humans. And these things bring us back to the first creation story we talked about in the previous episode. In the previous episode, which was dedicated to the first creation story that opens the Bible, we showed that it serves as a legal foundation for religious and social laws scattered throughout the Bible, of which we discussed only 3. These laws must be given to a human who can recognize the existence of God and who is capable of distinguishing between good and evil. And since God said to the first couple, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it," it is obvious that according to this story, the cycle of human and animal life is based on reproduction and death. If so, the question is, for what purpose is the second creation story needed? Before we answer that question, we should note that many old nations had several creation stories, so it is not surprising that there are 2 stories in the Bible as well. Now we will answer our question. The first creation story left many problems, and the second creation story resolved them. The first creation story does not deal with the question of how the perfect, pure God created a world where natural disasters, plagues, and wars occur, and where corrupt people live. This fact contradicts the belief in the perfect God, and the second creation story was an excellent solution to this contradiction. Yet, this solution has its obstacles. Since life in the garden was frozen, in order to start real life, where humans and all animals are born and die, it was incumbent upon the first couple to commit a crime and eat the forbidden fruit, which contains death, the most threatening element to the purity of the holy garden. Moreover, while animals act according to instincts, humans can choose whether to go the good way and fulfill the laws given to them by God, or to go the evil way and violate them, knowing that for better or worse, their actions determine their fate. Before we part, we'd like to introduce you to Dr. Leora Ravid, the creator and editor of our podcast. Ravid recounts that many years ago, as a young woman, she decided to pursue higher education. Not knowing what she wanted to study, she arbitrarily chose to focus on the Bible, simply to obtain an academic degree. According to her, the Bible ambushed her at the entrance to the university, and what began as an arbitrary choice became the story of her life. Ravid fell in love with the book that tells the story of her people's past and describes the social and legal customs prevalent in the ancient world. She says that she was captivated by the genius of writers who used the same words to tell the same story in 2 or even 3 different ways. Through this unique technique, they transformed short stories into narratives much longer than the number of words written. We have witnessed this brilliant technique in previous episodes of our podcast and will continue to explore it in future episodes. Unfortunately, techniques based on wordplay cannot be translated from one language to another, so they are not found in the English translation of the Bible. Ravid's podcast in Hebrew, the original language of the Bible, is considered a high-quality production. It combines the knowledge she has accumulated over many years with the caution and responsibility required of her as a historian and researcher. The English version of the podcast was made possible thanks to the use of artificial intelligence, which has reduced the cost of translation. Nevertheless, it remains a very expensive production for Ravid and her family members, who fund it out of their own pockets. This is why we always ask for our listeners' support. Anyone willing to support this unique project or sponsor it is invited to visit our website and donate through Patreon or buy us a cup of coffee through one of the options available on the site. Now we'll tell you about our next episode, which is a bonus episode. The 2 creation stories in the Bible incorporate charming and imaginative motifs that appear in the mythologies of ancient peoples. For example, the snake that spoke to Eve represents the forces of destruction and malicious cunning in ancient cultures. This might explain why J.K. Rowling chose it as the symbol for the Slytherin house in her book series about a young and likable wizard named Harry Potter. In the meantime, It would be a great help if you could tell your family and friends about our podcast. Until the next time, thank you very much for being with us.